Is that a yes?
Yeah, we're live.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
And here we go once again, ladies and gentlemen. Jeffrey Wilson, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich, chalking up another one for the archives right here on the Conspiracy Farm. Boy, even our pre-show conversation was awesome. I can only imagine what this is going to be. Before we start, how you doing, brother? I'm sorry.
I'm doing great. I'm excited that Justin Holstein, the mastermind behind helping us move forward in life and business and passion,
For sure.
has found us a local guest with an amazing amount of knowledge, and I'm excited about it.
And it's one of those just random things that I'm sure we've all had it happen. Just cab rides or times at the bar where you meet somebody. I'm like, oh my God, this dude's brain is just on fire.
A gem of the Quad Cities.
Yeah, exactly. A Quad City own. Before we even go, Justin, take it away, brother.
This is what happened, actually. I was helping a band. We were shooting promo photos. So I had a photographer down
Speak
there.
right into the mic.
At Great River Brewery. And so as I'm sitting there getting these photos taken, Joe is sitting there with his wife, and they are looking on, and they're asking what's going on. And I kind of started explaining, and they said, what do you do? And I kind of got down the whole paranormal path of all the tours and stuff and the films we've shot, et cetera, and the places we've went investigating around the world. And his wife had asked me, do you believe in ghosts? And I gave her this long, complicated answer, and I could tell by the look on Joe's face, he was absorbing everything I said. And generally when I'm talking, people's eyes glaze over because it's like a bunch of stuff that they have no idea, right? But he knew it all. And as I got down this conversation with Joe, I'm thinking, to me, he looked fairly young, especially, this thing was like, 2 years ago? Was it 2 years ago?
It's getting there, yeah.
And anyway, so I thought, how does this guy know this? What do you do exactly again? And the odd part is, Joe, a lot like his dad, is a self-educated person. He went out. You are a firefighter, paramedic, right, and a pilot, which got him studying a lot of the UFO stuff from a technical analysis standpoint. I mean, he really focuses on, is it wave harmonics? You can take it from there.
Just electromagnetics, the governing. But
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Joe Tabor.
And I'm stepping out.
Justin's out. Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Justin.
So, Joe, man, I mean, a jack of all trades, man. Obviously, I love picking the brain of people like yourself. But, tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you learn to? And Joe is the first guest so far. He came in with 3 or 4 books, some experiments that we were checking about electromagnetism.
And he's not your average fireman. I mean, he was a fireman on Antarctica.
Yeah, I'm a fireman from all over the world. So up with the Eskimos in Alaska and then Antarctica.
You done any smoke jumping yet?
No, but I've talked to them. Those guys.
I mean, if you're flying planes and you're a fireman, you just got to connect you just got to let somebody take over the wheel when you're,
Well, they got all the broken bones. Pilots, our bones are still intact.
True.
You know how it feels. I don't.
Yes. So, Joe, we want to talk about a lot of different subjects. First off, you want to set some ground rules for a discussion as far as the knowledge that the listeners need to understand. So, I mean, when you talk about Tesla, for instance, you want to take a base level of understanding for the guest or for the listeners, our fans at home, and kind of help them along, because there's many people that are listening for the first time who maybe have heard the name Tesla, don't understand who Tesla really was and how intelligent he was. But please, by all means, set that ground level of understanding for our listeners at home on Tesla's knowledge and what his focus was, and then we can go from there with all of that.
Yeah, Nikola Tesla. He was Serbian or Croatian.
Thank you.
Croatian. Well, it was before Croatia. It was the Austrian Empire. So he was
Croatian blood, Joe.
That's
Croatian
right.
blood,
I'm
Joe.
not arguing you. But this guy, he had some special things. I got a paper right here. People should read this. The Problem in Increasing Human Energy. We're talking about it all the time. Read it. Take time. Read 28 pages. It was written in 1900 in Century Magazine.
What's the name again?
The Problem with Increasing Human Energy. But he doesn't stop there. This guy was driven to help humans.
Right.
He was.
Right.
But
And so-
unfortunately, he wound up teaming up with some pretty bad guys that wouldn't. Just go ahead and explain that. Didn't really want his technology to get out there.
Well, we got to get the base level of understanding
For sure,
out
for
first
sure.
off. Come on.
And so the
Help me
base
out.
level, I've heard a quote from him. I haven't come across it. He wrote a lot. He wrote a ton, which means that he cared about people to share the knowledge. A lot of guys went away without that. But just understand, he had some special abilities he wasn't scared to write about. And I'll tell you what he said, and then you can read it yourself. But what I've heard quoted from him, I haven't read it yet in his quotes, but I believe it exists, is, and this conversation today should, if you can put this hat on and get rid of all that quantum blah-blah-blah, think like this: frequency, vibration, and power. All right? Something vibrates, the frequency that it vibrates, and then the power that it vibrates at. Really simple concept to understand, and everything he built worked off it.
And everything around us right now is vibration, correct?
Light, everything.
I mean, every substance around us has a vibration, really.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think people forget that because, we take a table for granted like you just tapped, but that's a solid mass that you can sense.
Yeah, to our senses, but it has a molecular structure that is vibrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're a sensing being all the time. We have 5, 6, 7, depending on who you're talking to. And you mentioned pineal gland. Sometimes we're not using all of our senses. But they're there. There's people that see auras all over the place. I'm not one of them, and I don't read about it very much, but I do understand the concept.
I have a couple of friends that see auras, and they have, said things to me about my aura.
Yeah.
And it tripped me out because they said you have a very powerful aura.
Yeah, and we can talk about, what light is, and maybe you can apply that. Somebody called it Justin's when I was with him, so that's how I knew who I was talking to a little bit. We never discussed that, but...
well, I'm going to write down Justin's light because we're going to have to get to that.
It's pretty good. It's not too bad. I never told him.
So let's talk more. Let's talk more on Tesla. Let's talk about residents. Let's talk about his goals, what he was working on, and there's a lot more to it. I mean, a lot of people feel that he was offed by the government. He was offed by intelligence folks, and all of his secrets were taken, and where they ended up. Some people even hypothesize or theorize that Trump's dad or Trump's grandfather or uncle got a hold of a lot of it. And
I heard something about that.
People have taken it so far as to say that Trump is a time traveler because of the technology. And Joe's over there like, hey, dude, it's not impossible.
How do you explain the Simpsons episode where he came down the escalator running for president like 10 years before it actually happened? Clearly a time traveler. I joke, ladies and gentlemen.
It's
Trump's
not a
in it
joke.
already. Yeah.
It's not a joke, though, right?
You never
Here he
know.
is.
So, Tesla was working on free energy. He was working on weapon systems that could knock stuff out of the sky, right? Pulse weapons, things like that. Tell us more about really what he was after, and how he was doing it.
So both those subjects, one of the ones I like to concentrate on is, he did father of electricity, hands down. The guy made it. People improved it. Steinmetz, look into him, and obviously Edison. Edison, DC is a whole different beast. AC is the thing that gets down the lines. DC is the power maker. They work differently, but and if you guys want to talk about it, we can. But Wardenclyffe, people stop at the surface level. We got to stop that. Wardenclyffe, there was a functionality there that we can talk about, because how that might have worked or likely did work is what Tesla was all about. He writes about it in this paper. I mean, but people need to understand how Wardenclyffe worked, and not just that it seemed like some energy that was suppressed and then taken down by J.P. Morgan. There's more to it than that. That's why Tesla cared about it and wrote him for 5 years straight every day. It wasn't about the money. It was for J.P. Morgan, but I would say that J.P. Morgan understood the implications of what free means. We wouldn't be living this way if
right.
You wouldn't be getting a light bill.
Exactly.
Right? You wouldn't be getting the gas and lights bill. You'd be just generating your own power off your own.
Yep. And
your
maybe
own-
the
your own
ancients
system.
understood this too.
I wouldn't doubt it.
We're going to get into that as well. Yeah. But I mean, I just find Tesla so fascinating because that would have completely changed the game had that technology been accessible to all, and the implications were just look at how many billions and trillions of dollars that they've made off, what could be potentially free.
And technically, it's obviously still there, right? It's still there to be accessed. It just comes down to the people that want to develop it and turn it loose. And there's people out there, I'm sure, who have studied enough of Tesla's works who could probably do it with the money backing, but obviously they either end up dead or,
right,
or somebody's going to buy the patent and just put it,
suppress it.
Because we've seen the patents purchased to, vehicles that will run for, 500 miles off a tank of water, right? Hydrogen cars, things like that. And those patents get purchased by big oil people. So obviously the free energy that's going to get scooped up, and if you don't sell, you're probably going to end up dead. I'm just being honest.
Well, that's a great segue, Champ. It's kind of our next subject, which Joe is passionate about, and that is kind of, you said your father did some work on the hydrogen fuel cell, and somebody I remember reading about ages ago, and I think it was the late 80s, mid 90s, his name was Stan Meyer. He developed basically a car that ran on water, was courted by the Pentagon, had a whole bunch of interaction with the Pentagon, and was poisoned and was killed around 96. But tell us about your affiliation and your understanding of the hydrogen fuel cell. And again, technology that is still available, just not being put into use from what I understand. But shed some light on Stan Meyer and the hydrogen fuel cell, if you will, sir.
Yeah, I went in deep with Stan Meyer because I wanted to know what this guy was doing. And it's, I would say conspiracy proves with his life. I don't know, we never have the answers to these. That's what's a stinker about conspiracies. But so my dad, in the 70s, there was oil embargoes. It's always oil, and he was thinking about hydrogen fuel cells. He's a local guy working at John Deere, and you can't make hydrogen fuel cells without electrolysis. You got to split the water from its hydrogen to its oxygen and split them too, because hydrogen is the useful product when they recombine. And there's no such thing as combustion without oxygen. Everybody knows that, who's ever tried to light a fire or a match or anything.
Right.
Was there some element of frequency to that, how that worked as well? Because when you separated the two molecules, you then zapped, I think it was the hydrogen with a certain frequency that made it combustible?
So Stan Meyer's thing, he had a fuel cell, essentially, but he didn't conform to the normal science that you're going to go get your degree in. He didn't do that. I mean, he was an inventor. He worked on radar, which is a frequency-based thing. And what he saw was an anomaly. He saw that when radar at a certain frequency combined with water, it evaporated, just like your microwave can do with your food, okay? So here's this guy, but, we always talk in terms of one frequency, and, maybe we should start thinking in terms of more than one frequency, a chord. This is something, and this is what I think Stan Meyer was touching upon, was he used a high voltage. You can see this readily in anything that he put out, and he had a series of different fuel cells, but he was able to apply a frequency or a number of frequencies at a high voltage, and he was able to split water. And that tells you, usually when you can break something up with something, that means that's what's holding it together. And mainstream science will tell you that electrostatics is what keeps water and molecules together. So Stan Meyer understood how to split it through a frequency or multiple frequencies along with the materials. Everybody thinks, copper's the only thing that can conduct electricity. No. There's tons of stuff that can. Silk can conduct electricity. Silver, is one of the most conductive materials that we know of. We're working with nowadays. We've got carbon. They're talking about that as, anything that's diamagnetic, it conducts electricity, and anything that's super cold, and this is where the future is, superconductivity, that's where you start seeing levitation and all these things. If it's super cold, it means it's super packed in, super diamagnetic. And understanding those molecular structures and atomic structures is where the work needs to be done. This isn't something that they're very interested in.
So to slow you down for 1 second is, how much electricity was needed to pull this off with the separation of hydrogen with water?
Stan Meyer was using thousands of volts.
So the electricity has to come from somewhere to be able to pull that off, right?
What is electricity? And he understood it a lot better than the materials he was using. He never talked about, because that's probably what he wanted to keep a secret. He was a secretive guy because he understood what he was up against.
So with Tesla's technology of free energy, free electricity, created from I don't understand obviously the way he done it, but I've seen models built by students at MIT, with the ball bearing spinning above the copper coil and all of that. For us for the average human being, electricity comes from burning coal. Electricity comes from a hydro power plant, a dam. So it has to come from somewhere. It can't just come from nothing. But that's the idea of being able to have electricity come from nothing was the key to the understanding of these higher level, scientists like Tesla and these other guys.
Yeah, we try to think of electricity as a substance, and it's probably not. They talk about electrons. They can't photograph them, and so electrons I would still put out there as just because you understand what it does doesn't mean you understand what it is. So in the case of electricity, it may be an effect and not necessarily a thing in itself.
That's an interesting concept to grasp.
Yeah.
An effect.
Right.
Just like our sound or everything's an effect. And, at the beginning of the show, we said our five senses are experiencing effects all the time.
Yeah.
Well, maybe electricity is that in itself too.
So, why isn't that? Obviously there's a financial aspect to it, but why aren't we seeing more utilization of Stan's technology? I'm sure other people have built upon it, if not just the basic tech in itself. Why aren't we seeing more of it? Is it because of the threat of death or et cetera, et cetera? If we start talking about renewable energy sources and alternative energy sources for cars like the Tesla vehicle, electric cars, et cetera, why isn't the hydrogen fuel cell a little bit more developed than what it is?
Well, when you start thinking, about, obviously, just not to get too deep into that threat part, is that when you are a challenger to any market, you're going to challenge the market you're against, and you can't expect them to just back down. So oil's not going to back down to free energy or solar or wind.
According to Ocasio-Cortez, they're going to in 12 years.
Well, if there's a big enough movement of the people, who knows?
Look, we're not going to get into that, but I already told you that Ocasio-Cortez, is a conservative intelligence group psyop.
You think?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, she does. She has no common sense when she talks about things. It's a deliberate. She's a deliberate plant to destroy that side of the field. I'm telling you.
Huh. We'll see.
Yeah, you just can't. You can't produce something that ignorant. You just can't do it. The powers that be wouldn't have allowed it to happen. You know what I mean?
You never know. These millennials are wild, man.
All right. Well,
you got a point. People need to dig into the details, and that's what I was going to say. You asked why it's not here. Well, it's not funded. Nobody's funding it. You got every psyop or whatever you want to call it, disinformation telling you it doesn't exist, and yet you got proof of it constantly, and that's what we're all sitting here saying. We've seen it. Stan Meyer wasn't a fake. His invention was real, and it's not here now, which means that it went somewhere. So, and he's just one of thousands. Tesla is a really good example because what would we do without electricity?
There has been a pretty serious disinformation against Stan Meyer's work, though, with certain litigation after he died, supposedly discounting the veracity of his claims about the hydrogen cells. But obviously, what are they going to say? It works.
And what is the potential danger with hydrogen cells? If you've got hydrogen powered vehicles, is there a risk? Say there's a head-on collision between two of these vehicles, or just one involved in a head-on collision that's very violent. Is there potential for hazmat having to show up, or worse?
Yeah, from the firefighter perspective, currently the reason you don't see hydrogen fuel cells, or one of the reasons they'll talk about, is because that's a technology that they can use. It just costs a little bit, and anyway, we won't get into that. But yeah, a pressurized cylinder of hydrogen has its risks. So does gasoline. So does moving fast in a vehicle versus a horse.
But
some inherent risks involved.
But a hydrogen pressurized cell blowing up as opposed to a gasoline cell, which one does more damage?
The hydrogen has the more potential.
That's what I was guessing.
If you don't engineer it out,
right?
But the Stan Meyer, the keys that I hope, if anybody's really interested, is he was working with frequencies and high voltage, and you need to think in the materials he was using, which I don't hear talked about. Is was he using platinum? Was he using silver? Was he using copper for his fuel cells? And what were his frequencies? And was he using more than one?
What would be your guess on the materials used?
I think, they were silver, as you look at the videos, or silver colored. So they were a platinum, a silver, something that conducts incredible amounts of voltage.
Okay.
And his formation, we got to start thinking in terms of geometry. This is not taught in the universities.
We're going to get into that a little bit.
Well, mathematicians used to teach math classes at every level. Now we just have people that have a teacher's certificate who can be handed a workbook and all the answers for every quiz and test.
That's right.
And that's where, I said this before. My grandmother, who died at, 96, 97, many, many years ago. I mean, we had her in our house for the last 10 years of her life, but I still have the notebook papers of her homework, her high school math. It's off the charts. I think it was some 8th grade and 9th grade stuff that was calculus already and far beyond a lot of stuff that people aren't even learning now. I mean, she was a genius.
Yeah, everybody kind of falls back on the mathematics as if that's where the solution is. Guys, mathematics is it's useful in describing something over a period of time. And we just got to accept that that's what mathematics generally is. It can lead you places, but it's a description, and a description's fine if you understand the thing you're describing. Well, when you have a false understanding of something, a theory, you'll get your answer that you want because you're going to form it with the mathematics you use.
Sure.
So this is where Tesla, he wasn't a mathematician. He was an experimenter. And he experimented some pretty significant things because we owe everything electrical to him, among others.
As a Stan Meyer expert, what were some of the benefits? I mean, obviously the financial. How far was he able to go, like in his buggy that he made? It was like an astronomical across the country on a gallon of gas or something silly like that. Do you know those breakdowns?
I don't know the MPG he was getting. He was using a relatively light vehicle. His computer, this guy's operating in the 70s and 80s, and he's dealing with he didn't have quite the computers that we got now. So if he had those, imagine what he can do. But he eventually got to the point where it wasn't much bigger than a spark plug with a nice little computer system tied to it.
He could fit it in his hand. The thing he could attach it, I guess, to any engine to have it convert the.
I guess it depends. I'm just being funny, but how many lakes were between him and the next place? So wherever he could get water, he could fill up his tank, and
it was any kind of water: tap water, rainwater, salt water. It had no impact on the cells.
He did another invention that people don't know about very much, but he had a toroidal invention that was probably greatly suppressed.
A toroidal?
That shape is something that all these inventors use.
Please explain that.
Yes.
Well, there's not a whole lot of information that you can get on it, and that's, go figure. He also had a brother that's still alive and worked on this stuff and won't talk to anybody anymore, and he's up in Canada working on something with cleaning up water, and with electricity, but I couldn't tell you the company. But essentially that toroid, he might have been, he was definitely making an energy field. And Stan Meyer was a secretive guy because he thought people were coming to get him, and
I'm sure they were.
What do you? I mean, the story is he was out to eat with somebody, stood up and said they poisoned me, and ran out in the street or something to that effect. How do you feel about his passing, and what are your thoughts on how he died?
When you listen and you read on somebody that smart, listen to everything he had to say, and then you can't ascribe somebody to being crazy. You can't be that smart. The guy put in the work. So I mean, I would say that. Yeah, it's an intelligent person would know that they're up against something. If I was building an engine that was competing with the oil industry, I would probably want some people watching my back.
Well, he had interactions with the Pentagon about possibly doing work or utilizing some of that to weaponize it, even in some cases. And I think he even was some industry. I think it was oil. Maybe offered him $1 billion to shelf it.
Yeah, that's what I've heard before. I haven't come across that directly, but I also wouldn't go knock on the door of the guy that I'm trying to take his business from, and that's what these inventors seem to do. And during Tesla's day, this was an open game because we didn't have electricity, so everybody was open to ideas. They weren't so tied into the ones they have.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty cool thing to think about.
The ones they had that were filling the banks up with their cash.
That's right, yeah. It was an open time versus Stan Meyer's time 70 years later where it wasn't.
So, I mean, let's go from Tesla back to ancient civilizations and the...
Well, yeah, that's what I was kind of going to segue, yeah.
We've lost many times over and over, as you've mentioned before, Jeff, the intelligence. And it seems like societies as a whole were intelligent, not just a few, but it seems like there were more than, right now our controllers seem to be pretty easily in control.
Oh, for sure.
Dumbing down the masses. I mean, do you see that over and over in society? The past ancient civilizations, did they dumb down their people on purpose, or did they give out this knowledge?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There was definitely a power control society, but how, what they were worried about being powerful to was more spiritual. These power leaders were thinking about what came after this, and their power structure was after that. You got to keep the people fed. You got to keep them happy. These guys knew that. Yeah, it does appear that they kept the knowledge among the elite. Especially if you're talking technology. But if you look at the stuff they made, I mean, we can't make some of that stuff today.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is, how do you hide the knowledge from the masses? Okay, they think you're a magician. If you use vibration to build the pyramids, and you're vibrating these massive blocks of stone into position to build this, there's going to be witnesses. There's going to be workers. There's going to be people who see this who go, okay, bow down to the master of magic, or you know what I'm saying? They had there had to be witnesses who weren't knowledgeable about this stuff who went, whoa, dude. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'll touch on it. So the guy pushing the possible levitating block or whatever, you know, he's not going to know how it works. He's the block pusher. The engineer that set it up, he's going to know how to engineer it. The guy that maybe knows the fundamental physics of what's going on or whatever knows that, if that's how something like that would occur, that person knows what they know. Society is no different now in that sense. As far as written text and ability to grab onto it, yeah, they probably didn't have the internet. We haven't found a cell phone yet.
It's like the design of the I-74 bridge. The guys that designed it, that understand the mechanics of it and the engineering of it and why it will stay up, there's a lot difference in intelligence levels than the guy that's pouring the concrete into one of the footings or a laborer. I understand that, right? So that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and now you and I have access to whatever textbook we want for the most part, and a lot of information and some time to think on it. So we can probably get there a little quicker than somebody who didn't have that and was in a system of, you know, great difficulty to rise up to that. You weren't exactly going from the bottom class up. And all my studies of ancient everything, I mean, there's clearly a lot of people that were really engineer smart, if you will, and they were making a ton of product. But it doesn't necessarily mean they had all the answers. They weren't sharing the knowledge among each other as far as it points. But yet, here's these massive things that they built that we can't. So maybe they did have more dissemination than we understand, or
that's
we have a big ego today.
And that's part of modern masonry, in terms of, you know, there were actual masons, you know, and then Freemasonry, which is obviously different. But the words, you know, the knowledge that's kept, you know, the master builders had passwords. They had words that allowed them to travel freely, because they were of that level. They were allowed to go from country to country and things like that. And the laborers did not, they never found that out unless they worked their way up to that level, which was very difficult to do. And Tubal-Cain, who, not Tubal-Cain, I'll just say that the master mason who was building the temple was killed for the password. He didn't give up the password. He was killed. Okay, I'll just say that. And so that was, you know, something that everybody really desired, was that knowledge and that password, to be able to gain that knowledge, is what I'm saying.
Right.
I kind of went in circles there a little bit.
Well, no, I mean, there's always been certain levels of kind of compartmentalization about this, you know, whether it's today or back in, you know, your ancient mystery schools, or even dating back further than that. I feel, kind of looping it back to Tesla, and what are your kind of thoughts about this? You know, almost like Graham Hancock says, you know, we are a civilization with amnesia, and I think a part of that lost understanding is where we really came from, as well as kind of an ancient technology, if you will, excuse me, that did exist back in the day and has been systematically suppressed for a very long time. Wherever you believe, like we kind of talked before we went on there, whether you believe civilization started with the Sumerians, or, you know, when we had Billy Carson on, whether it's up and down over the last few 100,000 years, there was something back then that we just don't have anymore. Like you said, we can't do the Göbekli Tepe today. We couldn't build that, or, you know, the Great Pyramid with the kind of precision. What are your
Joe
thoughts on that?
Joe kind of shook his head like, yeah, I could build it.
Right.
I did. On Göbekli Tepe. That's how detailed of a guy I am. You give me a good team and I'll build, you know, give me the guys from your crew, Pat, and I'll build Göbekli Tepe. But I need some artisans. So anyway, you know, so stone. Why use stone? Well, I mean, stone lasts the longest. So maybe they weren't cavemen. Maybe they're really smart because their stuff stuck around. You know, a good question is, why is Göbekli Tepe buried? And, you know, everybody's saying, oh, they buried it on purpose. That's doubtful, because everything's buried in this whole world. We need to start digging.
Sediment from the Great Flood?
Well, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. You know, Plato and Pythagoras, who we don't have his writings, but Plato and all these Greek philosophers, they didn't think those things were fake. Read them if you want to debate it. You got to read it. And they didn't think those things didn't occur. The Egyptians, wrote about it, but these symbols have the key. The symbols that they wrote down, it's an efficient way to write something, and their symbols talk worldwide. I mean, not to bridge, but we have symbols in one place that's clear across the world that's pretty much the exact symbol. It seems like they all understood the same knowledge, and they were concentrating. They never, money was present. Don't get me wrong. We find coins and everything else, but they seem to have a lot more concentration on other things, which is, basically their science, but it's spiritually driven.
Alchemy, would you say more emphasis on things like alchemy and celestial procession, etc.? Is that kind of part of the tech that we're missing today? Is that understanding of not so much astrology, but the processions of the stars, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, alchemy gets a really bad rap because people associate it with wizards or something like that. Well, Tesla used alchemy because really alchemy is the use of the vacuum. And the symbols support that too. But the use of the vacuum technology, we use vacuum for some things, but not enough. The really big inventors like Tesla were using vacuum tubes.
What is that?
So a vacuum, we know that space is a vacuum. You go out there, there's relatively nothing. You can't breathe in it. A vacuum is basically a suction. So you pull a drain or use your vacuum cleaner, you're pulling a suction. Well, we don't use that in this modern world. We seem to only want to use, for the most part, combustion, the outward movement, the radiation. Gravity functions on a vacuum, and that's why we have space. So
you hear that, Eddie Bravo?
So energy can be created from the vacuum process.
It's the other side. It's the, I don't know if we have cameras on us.
We do.
You do.
What goes up,
right.
goes
there's,
down.
There's a camera right there aimed at you. So
the
now, Eddie Bravo would say gravity doesn't exist, and that fell because that little chunk of matter is more dense than the atmosphere, so it was just pulled to the ground because of its density, not because of some force pulling it to the ground.
Yeah, as far as what do you have to say about the flat earthers?
Well, hold on.
Well, that's where
killing
we're going. Sorry, go ahead.
It makes no sense, and I don't even spend time researching.
Yes.
Thank you.
My guy.
All right, now back to what we were talking about with the vacuum.
Don't email me.
It's coming after all of us.
So the vacuum and alchemy are synonymous. Alchemy's got a really bad name, and it's not wizardry. If you read about what they were using it, just respect that they use different words than us.
Exactly.
I told you one earlier, we talk quantum physics all the time and dark energy. Well, they had another word from that a quantum physicist would really have problems with me saying right now, which is the ether. But read anything that Tesla and all these geniuses wrote, they were always talking about the ether. They weren't ignorant. We've turned that word into something else so that they can remarket it and justify their jobs. Why they need to change terms all the time, I don't know. It makes it confusing for guys like you and me.
Let me ask you, do you think, and this isn't, I hate saying the disclaimers, but how big of a role does religion play in that, in the usurping the language and kind of, inverting reality kind of sorts?
They're doing their own thing all the time, it seems like, and they have their agenda, and their agenda is probably, a bit of power control. I think I'm speaking from a historical perspective.
Right. So
sometimes it's in people's benefits to keep people confused. And so before the ether, it was being called something else, sure, but we gotta land on some common terminology and stop arguing each other about what word you call something, and then make fun of it so that we have to change the word.
Yeah.
Which is what happens with ether.
Yeah. Or demonizing the term like alchemy. I mean, like when I was a kid, I always associated it with wizardry and Merlin, et cetera, et cetera. But when you grow up, it's like learning about more of the mystery schools, et cetera, et cetera. It's some real stuff.
Yeah, Tesla wasn't going to laugh at the word alchemy. I mean, Einstein read Helena Blavatsky, and she was a theosophist, and alchemy was, a common word that she would use. So these guys, Oppenheimer makes reference to Hindu religion. You read his diaries and his works. These guys, their inspiration came from this stuff. When you dig in and you read them, but you've got to read their words from their mouths, not from me. But I'll try to help. Do
you see kind of society the way it's going, and obviously it's not a cure-all, but do you think we kind of need to go back to more of that? Because now we're just, like Pat was saying earlier, the dumbing down of society, and we're all just kind of consumers. The new Jordans come out and people were trampling for a pair of freaking shoes, which is, those guys, your Aristotle and your Pythagoras has to just like be laughing their asses off seeing shit like that. So it's just like,
because we are.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. Well, as a society, though, I mean, do you have the new iPhone where you're laying or whatever it is?
Here comes Black Friday, fist fights.
Yeah, precisely.
That's what I need to do is just make a living calling fights on Black Friday, right? Just go to the supermarket or the nearest Walmart and just call fights.
So do we need a little bit more of a return to that?
Yeah. So the term philosopher and these guys, that that's truth seeker. That's what that broke down to in Greek. You got to ask yourself what matters to you. If materialism matters to you, which is what they fought against completely, and materialism and atomism was a word that they actually beat. So during the Greek times is what I'm talking about. Atomism was actually like a bad religion to these guys because they believed in reincarnation and oneness of the, I'm going to call it the ether.
Right.
But they understood that there was a substrate that was one and that's where we propagated from. And that's what science is currently showing. We're currently getting glimpses of this all the time. You got guys like Leonard Susskind talking about holographic theory and stuff like this. Guys like me are going, well, what is the sun? And that would be an interesting subject if you want to get around to it eventually, is that, you got to ask yourself what and why. And if what you care about is your Jordans, that's cool. That's your journey. But, some other people actually care about some other stuff. And I think there's a lot of people out there. I've never had a bad conversation.
And, because of the people that we've been exposed to and the, intelligent people like yourself that we've been exposed to and the different thought processes on a different plane than most people think, it's difficult for just myself. I can't watch the news. I can't see the madness going on out there because these people haven't even entered even the realm. Look, I got hit in the head for a living for 20 years, Joe. But I can at least enter that realm of understanding, trying to grasp all these different ways of thinking and the different levels of intelligence that are out there. Most of society isn't there. They don't think past what's on their cell phone screen. They don't think past what's, the Kardashians and all this crazy shit going on. It's madness to me to even I want to just put it in a room and just burn it, right? Just get rid of it altogether and just get to a higher level for society in general, right?
But is that by design?
Well, sure it is. It's why it makes us think we're crazy until we go, wait a minute.
Right.
We've been proven right so many times on all the conspiracies that we talked about a year or two before they actually were covered or were uncovered by mainstream media because they had to, because it was obvious that, everyone knew by the time, 2 years after we'd been talking about it. But for someone like yourself, who's obviously a very intelligent person, you have to look at the rest of society and go, holy fuck. Like, this is, what do you think when you sit there and look at the TV and go, there's nothing on TV that I can even remotely, do you just throw a rock through your screen or just got rid of your TVs or what?
You just said it. I got rid of my TV.
Thank you.
Good man.
You can't read and watch TV at the same time. You got to concentrate. And if you put your focus on it, you get the answer. Now, with that stuff is that I find myself getting frustrated, but yet every time I want to focus in on something, I've never met a person who hasn't told me some story that's like, whoa, it's innate in us to understand where we come from, but yet we let people push us around and tell us how to think.
Right.
And that, when they make fun of us, our feelings get hurt and we don't want to pursue it. If Tesla would have done that, we wouldn't have any electricity. So you got to listen to what is telling you matters and then try to have conversations about it like we're in here doing, and you guys have been doing the good work. Think and have resolve in yourself to find answers and read the source. Go to the source. With this, I was in the Oriental Museum up in Chicago. It's the University of Chicago. They got Sumerian artifacts. No, that's what they call it. I didn't call it that.
They called it the Oriental Museum?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Wow, it's not to get distracted, but it's like Triumph the Insult Dog when he goes to New Hampshire University and the dog, the
right.
Rottweiler, and he's going, she's a first year student. She's not a freshman. She's a first year student. He goes,
please.
Did you go to the first year orientation? And she goes, yeah. And he goes, orientation? She goes, yeah. And he goes, don't you mean Asian-tation?
Oh, Jesus. People aren't Asian. Things of the culture, like the food, the rugs, that could be called Oriental, described as Oriental.
Okay, I just want to be politically correct here, but
well, I'm the PC dictionary.
We're always politically correct.
Damn fucking straight.
You guys,
anyway,
you're not going to bog me down because we're all made out of the same atoms, man.
Thank you. We're all stardust.
You were at the Oriental Museum. Continue, please.
Yeah, so here's these 4,000 or 5,000 year old artifacts everywhere. Just in that one, they're in every museum around the nation, and the engineering that goes into them. Good luck making that with a saw. A lot of these things don't have chisel marks on them. They're super heavy. What it took for us to move them there were our earliest trucks and massive amounts of people. The symmetry in the statues are unbelievable, which means that they had really good tools to be able to do the symmetry, not to mention the artistry of the carving. I'm not trying to say that the 3D printed them. I'm saying that they had ways to cut it that were more than copper. But also, here's the thing about people. Everybody that went in there that day, I'm sitting there staring at one thing for 20 minutes trying to figure out what I just told you. Everyone's capable of that. And yet everybody's going in there going, that's pretty, that's big, that's heavy. And then they go through the
wondering
museum.
how the hell they did it.
And so you're not going to figure anything out in this world.
Right.
And Tesla didn't think like that. Stanley Meyer didn't think like that.
So what do you think the connection to higher intelligence and hallucinogens might have? Like connecting us back to spirituality, to understanding, many more things about this universe that we're in and about ourselves than what's on the surface for the person that's never, say, done it or experimented with it.
Well, if we stick to the science that we got, and we won't go into the oral history of spiritualities and different religions, they're all talking about the same thing. But look at Stanford Research Institute back when it was operating with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. These are big names. They got a lot of press, and they did the hard research, and they were associated with institutions that weren't shy about saying they were associated with CIA, and they got it from the military and things like this. Well, the research shows that when you calm your brain, everything is non-local, and this completely corresponds with everything we know about physics. Is that we're made of these atoms, we're made of this substrate that gets smaller than that. We are interconnected. So when you calm your brain, which it seems to be the common denominator in this, your brain is capable of doing things that were experimentally tested, and the results showed that it's a non-local, so meaning, I don't have to be there to experience something, whether that be with these texts, angels or, these different things. So whether you're experiencing a being or an aura or a thought, where do your thoughts manifest from? But when you're in dreams, come on, you're sleeping. When you calm your brain, your body is obviously capable of this. Is the pineal gland the actor? Yeah, but not alone. How about this? Our whole body is being run off electricity, and it's not the sort of electricity that is in our power lines.
Right.
And guess what? Doctors don't study this very closely. A little bit, with heart rhythms and things like that. Yeah, they understand that it's functioning, but they use certain, they use magnetic resonance imaging, and it's in everything, x-rays, they're using it all the time for everything for their clinical decisions, but they don't seem to, the research is not very strong about, and chemical reactions with the medicines, in respecting it. But I don't know if that answered your question. It was like, the common denominator seems to be if you calm your mind, you can do a lot more than
it opens
the research.
Up, but hallucinogens seem to open up doors of understanding and to a realm that we can't see, we can't feel, we can't touch, but through those hallucinogens, people do things. They experience things like DMT and these other drugs, peyotes, and everything else, to where they literally feel like, as you mentioned down in South America, ayahuasca, where they call it the death drug. Is that it? Where they feel that they've actually passed on and experienced what is after this life, and when they come back, they're like, I have no hatred toward anyone anymore. No grievance.
Right.
Anything that anyone's ever done to me.
Well, and this has been used for, it's all, a lot of shamanic cultures have been using this stuff for hundreds of years, if not longer. And now we're getting around to the point where MDMA, psilocybin, is actually being used for soldiers' PTSD or even marriage counseling. So, we're beginning to have more of a better understanding of psychedelics as opposed to kind of, whatever. It's going to make you a schizophrenic or jump out of a window and think you can fly.
So 2 fighting spouses on mushrooms, is that what you're saying?
No, they use, I think it's in Canada where they use basically ecstasy or MDMA for marriage therapy, and it's, very effective. So
interesting.
Well,
wow.
The shamans and the priests, it's not a hidden secret that they were using this stuff, but then they came back and wrote about it, and they taught about it, and they talked about dream time. And yet, we're not even allowed to get money for research on it. These governments aren't funding that sort of stuff. Peru is just, allowing it.
Okay.
You know, it's legalized more or less. So let's put some money into figuring out how this stuff works instead of just like
building prisons.
and stopping it. You know, this stuff could be some of the answers. You know,
but again, I mean, on the conspiracy farm, in my opinion, this is all by design. You know, socially engineered to keep us stupid, keep us, you know, as consumer based and up with the Kardashians as much as possible. Because, like you said, once you start calming your mind and starting to realize there's more outside of your reality than you can actually perceive, almost like the light spectrum. You know, we can't see it, but we know gammas exist. We know infrareds exist. So there is reality out there that we just can't perceive. And, you know, I think there's a big motive to keep us stupid and not thinking kind of on those levels, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, couldn't say it better. I mean, that is the brainwashing. It's not some little chip in you necessarily. It's the thing you're putting into you. That's the brainwashing, or at least one of them.
Right.
We have some more before we let you go, and actually we have time. So I mean, yeah. Anyway, cymatics. What are your understanding of cymatics when we're talking about how sound and frequency can be used? When you talk about cymatics and these metal boards or metal plates that they pour like salt on or whatever, and you hit them with a certain frequency, it turns into different geometric shapes. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, let's try to throw a little more technical stuff too. Is that? So yeah, cymatics, everything has a resonance. Every single substance, air, whatever, it all has a resonance in its quantity. So you take a bucket of something, you're going to find a resonant frequency of it. But remember, there could be a chordal frequency, so more than one frequency, but one resonant frequency. And you can test this with a speaker and a pan if you want to see cymatics. But with like water or sand and cymatics itself, you end up seeing these different patterns that form. And there's been good research. I wish I could tell you the stand something or other, you know, there might be a correlation with languages having emulated the cymatics of the vibrations, which is fundamental. I mean, that's but that's kind of, it's not researched enough. But so
it's almost like the German language was created out of hate and the French language was created out of love.
Well, the word ohm, like, you know, and these different words that have carried on, you know, that's a vibrational pattern, or how you say it, like like the monks they do the guttural singing of it. But you know, that vibration thing, why that's important, why anybody should care about that is, you know, say you have a resonance, which is what the cymatic thing is. You find a resonant so the substance is able to vibrate at that tune and it's showing you a pattern. Well, that's what Tesla was messing with too, and this energy thing that's most important. This is what the kids are trying to figure out and save the world with. You know, this is one of the things they need to look into. You know, he's saying, okay, you got a pattern like a string, and that's a resonant frequency or a frequency. Well, it may not be resonant, but when you hit the resonant, so the wire, and you have the resonance, you find it, the tune that it likes, and it starts vibrating on its own. Well, that's where you get those harmonics.
Right.
And that's when you get it up into the thousands upon millions upon trillions in the spectrum of light. Well, what is light? It's probably a longitudinal wave, so it's not the up down wave motion. It's the in between. You know, this could be going and having a frequency, but when I find its resonant frequency, it's static. It's a continuous wave, and when you hit it, you feel it over here immediately.
Right.
Because if I shook it, it'd take a second.
Okay.
For those unable to see him, he was waving a little copper wand in front of him.
Yeah, I should have had a string or something.
That's quite all right.
But I'm trying to show that when you hit something here, it's immediately felt over here, and that's when you have a resonant frequency of something.
Okay.
And that's important. That resonant frequency, it seems to be the key to all these technologies. Tesla wasn't too shy about saying it. You know, the sun could be resonantly, harmonically coupled to, you know, we need to kick that idea that the sun's a burning ball of hydrogen or helium by itself. You know, go out in space and tell me if you heat to death or freeze to death. Tell me which one happens first. There's more going on there, which is those waves and how they're striking our atmosphere.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I never thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Moving towards the sun, you would freeze to death. Where it's 80 degrees here in the summer, as you move out towards the sun, you're going to freeze to death on your way there, right?
Depends on where you're at in space. You know, if you're, it gets really hot if you're on a planet somewhere and you know, the atmosphere is in between you. But yeah, where you're facing on the sun is what these researchers with these theories, you know, on the Earth's axis related to floods or things like that, whether they're asteroid strikes or tilts in our Earth or pole shifts even, is that, you know, how we face that sun and how that sun interacts is not necessarily the heat definitely isn't transferring from there to here. It's a rate of vibration, like a really powerful. Well, you said gamma, but light specifically, so even higher. And it's striking our atmosphere, which is composed of nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, and a bunch of other stuff. And that stuff's vibrating. And that stuff is the stuff that's heating us. We're basically cooking in a steam
those
bath.
Molecules.
It would appear so, yeah. But this is not something that not everybody agrees on.
Something interesting that I found, I didn't, when Tesla launched that car into space, of course, there was a huge move to say how fake that was. And I always found interesting in like my college space exploration class that there's a, whatever it was, like 250 or 500 degree difference between light and shadow. So if it's in the sun in any way out there, why isn't it melting?
Yeah, exactly. The shadow and why isn't it melting? Yeah, it depends on what the substance is. It's getting hit by those gamma rays too. We don't melt when we have an X-ray going into us, but long enough we do get a radiation burn. Same thing would happen to you in space, but all of a sudden you're in our atmosphere and you're getting a sunburn. Okay, well, it's because the stuff that you're standing in. I mean, picture if you were in water and it was boiling, you would get burned. Well, we're in an atmosphere, which is a gaseous water, kind of. And yet we're getting burned. We put copper on ourselves, which is the same thing we put on our power lines. And, so sunscreen is what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
And, and it's funny how that works. So we're putting sunscreen that's kind of almost copper-based on our skin to protect us. Well, what are we really doing? We're actually protecting ourselves from the electricity. We're basically putting this diamagnetic substance so that it doesn't go through into us. That's a very interesting thing that people don't think about.
And then the electricity travels around our skin on that surface? Or is it reflected?
Yeah, so I wouldn't break that all down like I just said there, but what is understanding is that how the sun is interacting with our atmosphere could be the determining factor, and also our where we're at in relation to the sun or the power of the sun. What the sun is, essentially, could tell us a lot about this global warming thing and, give a different perspective from a scientific point of view. Now, this is something that maybe they don't want you to know because we can control CO2, they think, but we can't control position of the Earth. We can't control the sun's intensity, which they've been monitoring forever. They've always been monitoring the intensity of the sun. We used to have to bounce radio signals off the ionosphere, and that's why we changed over to different technology because the ionosphere was shifting too much.
Okay.
And so...
Are you talking AM to FM?
Well, yeah, that.
Right.
But even longer waves, wave transmission back before we had...
So something, I don't mean to bounce around, but something Billy Carson talked about, we had him on, going back to kind of the ancient technology, ancient civilizations. He was saying, not Antarctica, but, and I do want to get to that, but Atlantis was like a global phenomenon, that's why you see a lot of these symbols that you talked about, a little bit of everywhere. Living in St. Louis, outside of St. Louis in Cahokia, Illinois, there's the Cahokia Mounds, they call them. What did you say off air of the significance of the Cahokia Mounds?
All the mounds in the U.S. and Squire and Davis is the authority in the early 1900s or 1800s, somewhere in that range. Squire and Davis was hired by the Smithsonian to go around and map all these, and they did, and that was a lifelong thing for them. And they got all the tales from the Native Americans that were telling them, we didn't really build this. They wrote it down. Those are their words, not mine. But these things were geometrically significant. They were corresponding to the stars, essentially, which they were clearly following with their sundials and other things. And also the systems of measurement seem to be congruent, meaning they're using the same systems of measurement in the U.S. Now, Randall Carlson and these guys talk about how these structures, these ancient structures like the pyramids he talks about, is basically geometrically shaped. They have their own unit based off where they are latitude and longitude, meaning, and it appears that that's connected to the sun. So essentially they're planted in a specific spot to be specifically sized to that specific point.
And they're not random at all.
Never.
Like even though these are ancient structures, which predate Native Americans, by the way, correct?
Well, so the ones in the U.S., they've been around. We don't study it. That's the thing is, I believe the law is called NAGPRA. It was in the 90s where they said we're not going to dig up anymore, as they term Native American mounds. Well, I mean, the thing is, the Native Americans, according to Squire and Davis, said we didn't build these, which means whoever was there before them,
right,
it needs to be studied. And there's pieces of these where rivers have cut out sections of it, which means, and this is what Randall Carlson speaks towards too, is you study the erosion pattern, you get a timeline.
Yeah.
And that timeline's going to shock people. And not to mention, you mentioned Cahokia, that's a lot of dirt to move. That's a civilization right there. And why were they building mounds? That's the question. I mean, not only maybe were the star maps, but in Cahokia, there's a pyramid, and this is one thing people need to, you guys will really, I think, find interesting, is that pyramids, picture a funnel, if I put it upside down. Pyramids, and there's a guy on the internet that he'll go by like Mr. Magnet Man or something and look up his pyramid video, but the highest static magnetic field that I believe we've achieved with a fixed magnet, so not an electromagnet, was a pyramid-shaped magnet.
Right.
Essentially that shape is significant. It wasn't just a wonder. So was there an energy center that they were trying to pull down and tune into the Earth? And Tesla's telling you the Earth is a static energy field. If you hit it, it will, just like brake fluid, it's going to come out on the other end just as much. That's how he was manipulated.
Was there an element of, for lack of a better term, as far as them not being placed in random places, chakra and meridians, as far as energy points on the planet?
Yeah, that energy point and ley line, I mean, just to break that down real simply, is that's a magnetic line of force. They have these different terms for it, but that's what it is, and it moves. So it can move, and it can be affected by where it's at, water, underground water, everything has energy to it, and that's what we have to appreciate.
And not to go on, I've seen whether it's thermal imaging or what technology they've used on the pyramids before in Egypt and other places, that they do focus magnetic energy, right?
The structure itself and what I just mentioned there with the shape is definitely a very powerful shape, and we need to study what's underneath these things. We need to start digging in the ground deep. And
do you have any theories or hypotheses of what that Great Pyramid was used for? I mean, I know pyramids in general you say have a certain power, but like that one in particular, it's obviously not a tomb.
Yeah, there's no hieroglyphs in there. I have great respect for anybody who's doing research towards it. I believe, based off the fact that it seems to be built towards that exact coordinate with their own units of measurement, and the shape itself, that it's a funnel. It could possibly be an energy device that's tuned to the sun. So like a solar array for a pyramid, essentially vibrating, resonant, and and
could these also be locations for portals? I mean,
when you have a high enough static when you have a high enough static electricity environment, you're going to start seeing anomalies go on. And I didn't come up with that. This is what Tesla talked about with, Twain even kind of hinted towards it, Mark Twain. But you'll start seeing anomalies. John Hutchinson, he saw a lot of anomalies.
Right.
That's the real deal. And so could you manipulate? So black holes, we know time is going to be a lot slower there than they are somewhere else. If I go out in space, my time slows down relative to yours. Or I'm sorry, yours speeds up. But so yeah, you could see a definite change in environment, which is, that kind of blends in with that UFO technology. But what we're talking about with all that is incredibly high voltages. How you're using them, I don't know, but
right.
At high voltages, you're going to see anomalous things, and we use it currently. That's what our electricity is. We're not that different, but.
So let's get back to the law that was passed. What was the name of the law that was passed to stop us from exploring and digging these relics or these ancient buildings, these structures up?
All right. Native American Grave Protection Act is what and so if I mess that up a little bit, it's okay. I forgive myself. But
they tell us they're burial mounds.
They tell us they're burial mounds.
But there are pyramids underneath them.
Yeah, read the excavation reports back when they were digging up 90% of them around the U.S. And then go visit the ones that are still here, shaped like serpents or pyramids that we still preserve.
We need to expose this a lot more to get that law lifted.
There's a lot of good researchers trying. Let's just do some archaeology. You can respect the grave sites and still do the archaeology. If they're figuring out how to do it in Egypt and every other country, Peru especially, why can't we do it?
Absolutely.
Let's dig deep.
And I think that the underlying reason for that, to me, on the surface anyway, would be they don't want the real history to be known.
Yeah.
Am I correct in hypothesizing that?
Yeah. I mean, we come in here and we. I don't think this is really up for debate. There were people here before us. Before the current U.S. American culture, I'll call it, and so there's a lot of toes that are going to be stepped on, but there's a lot of real, it's not whose land it was. Before it was yours, it was someone else's. Before it was theirs, it was someone else's.
Right.
That goes on. And, it's all ours in the sense. But, yeah, let's study it and learn something from it, because these guys were geniuses.
Right.
They were mapping things perfectly. We need to know what they understood, not just dig it up and bury it and turn it into a farm field. Once
Right.
it's lost, it's gone.
And Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock and all those guys, they talk often about how far back. I mean, we're talking about the ancient star maps, the website that I showed you, the Forbidden History. We're talking a couple 100,000 years that mankind, they believe, has been on this planet at least.
Well, and you have, I forget the name of it, but
We're not talking cavemen.
No, I know.
We're not talking guys that walk like me.
No, for sure. I mean, you have ancient maps that show Antarctica when Antarctica technically
I've
wasn't
had a
even
few
defined.
spine injuries, Joe. Don't laugh at me. So, no, but that's the thing. When you sit there and look at it, take a step back. Absolutely, I truly believe that we have, from a lot of the scientists who say, look, we've been here for 200, 250,
We are a
300,000
civilization
years.
with amnesia. Grant Hancock's
Exactly.
latest book. I mean, and that's a great way to phrase it. I mean, and it's just crazy to see how the concerted effort. I wanted to ask you about this kind of, this legislation about not digging up more Indian mounds. It makes me think of the conversation we had with a couple guests about the wars in Iraq and Syria, and these things really being about an archaeological war, going after ancient relics, et cetera, to once again
Tablets in the Grand Lodge in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
What's that?
The Grand Lodge Museum, the ancient tablets that were taken out of Iraq during the war in Iraq that Bush had brought back because Bush Sr. was a Mason, and those tablets were taken out of Iraq, and they rest in the museum, the Masonic Museum in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Yeah, a lot of those artifacts went to other places. There was a mainstream corporation here in the U.S. that got in trouble for bringing in artifacts during that time. I'm not going to mention their name, but type it in. There's money in artifacts, there's no doubt, but there's answers in artifacts.
Yes.
And that's also part of the thing is that, obviously, look who buys artifacts. People with a lot of money.
Right.
And they don't all go to the museum, guys. Don't be confused. There's private collections that it would just blow your mind all over, and you can't see them. Even when you go in these museums, they got most of the stuff locked up, and if you're not someone important, they're not going to go show you what it is. If you're a researcher like some of these guys that are digging into what we're digging into, we go against their agenda, and they don't necessarily want to show their collections to you because you may go write a book about it.
Well, there's something Billy Carson said about the Library of Alexandria. I've always thought of it as they burned it. They burned the books, but he was like, no, man, they might have burned the physical library, but the texts and the scrolls they took to obviously keep this information.
And he believes they are where?
What do you say, the Vatican? Yeah.
The basement of the Vatican is what he hypothesized. But it's what are your thoughts on the Emerald Tablets, the translations? Did they exist? The Toth being the author. It's amazing to listen to the translation. Number one, I've listened to it several times since we had Billy on, which blew my mind. What are your thoughts on those?
Translation is important. You got to study who your translator is. If your translator doesn't understand what he's reading about, I wouldn't want a mathematician trying to read about something an artist is trying to write about. So understand who the translator is. Go to as far sources as you can and get the best translation. Emerald tablets and all these things, they're deep. They're spiritual. You got to respect that. Emerald tablets is alchemical. They're talking science to you, but it may be something that we're not up to yet. As far as locations and things like that, guys, it's not impossible to go underground. Elon Musk is doing it, digging, and our ground penetrating radar, it doesn't go that deep. If you want to keep stuff away from people, you go underground. And it's not that hard to dig holes and tunnels. And this technology, study technology to understand that we know how to do these things. You know?
Well, it's rumored that this very thing, and you could speak to this having been there, is going on in Antarctica. There's supposedly secret underground UFO bases or military bases. What's going on in Antarctica, my man?
Well, I was there.
Are there things you can't talk about?
No, I did not sign a top secret agreement with, but I did work for, Raytheon at the time. So
some people's ears just perked up.
Yeah, Raytheon,
that's right.
Raytheon.
One of the big boys. One of the big boys.
Is there a guy cleaning his sniper tool right now?
I hope not.
What's his name? Joe Tabor?
Oh, man.
I got him.
I believe it.
So
yeah.
tell us more about Antarctica.
what's going
All
on?
right, so I was just a poor old firefighter paramedic down there, but they bring people down for contracts, and their bases kind of look like junkyards. Even their South Pole station, they can't seem to keep above the snow for more than 20 years, but I've been to both of them. I've seen the infrastructure that goes into them. Politicians came down when I was down there, 06, 07. You can look it up. I don't know what they're so interested in. I mean, it's a cool place to see. Trust me, it's a pricey little ticket to go down as a layperson. And they don't let you go anywhere you want to go down there. You know, you're told what path you can walk on, where you can go. Now, as far as the buildings go, I went into most of them. And I didn't find any secret stairwells or secret technology, but they were studying neutrinos. Those ice cores, I watched them pull them up. I saw the data. I listened to the scientists. I met the scientists. People are really doing real work down there.
Yeah.
And penguins are adorable. You know, I'll give that to them. But as far as the conspiracy theorists go, you know, it's a big place. I don't understand why there's a continent that people can't live on. That's an agreement between a lot of different countries saying we're doing science. But here's another thing to think about. The South Pole and the North Pole are significant places of energy.
Yes.
There's a reason there's ice there. And people need to start figuring out, well, why is there ice at the South Pole and not, you know, at the equator? Because of the magnetic field. There's some really interesting. So could there be anomalies down there? Oh, yeah, because the Earth is a really big power plant. And so, yeah, I mean, I could imagine that there could be anomalous occurrences that maybe they are interested in. They're not going to let a firefighter paramedic know about it. But, you know, it's not for lack of trying.
Are you familiar with Admiral Byrd, I think it was?
Oh, yeah.
So spill the beans on that a little bit, what he theorized was going on down there.
Man, there's a lot of, what do you call it, that disinformation with him. But if you look at the history, where he went, which I've looked at, and the places he was going to, and what he brought with him, I mean, he brought a lot of stuff with him. And it wasn't just to map the place. You do need a lot to map a continent, but why are you even mapping it at that time period with that much stuff? You know, before him, we were going down there with wooden boats and Shackleton and Scott and Edmondson. These guys were just trying to figure out how to cross the darn thing. And now he's coming down with huge ships and subs and aircraft and crashing them and doing all this stuff and flying them personally himself, I believe. He flew missions. So they were interested in something that they were willing to spend a significant amount of money to.
You would think with the, you know, the magnetic fields there at the North and South Poles that is it possible that they're working on, of course, you're going to answer probably yes, but propulsion systems, weapon systems based on those energies and working on that stuff scientifically. Is that, I mean, would that be a safe bet?
Well, they put the neutrino detector at the South Pole, which is probably the most expensive place possible to put a piece of machinery that big. And so there's a reason, and they'll tell you it's so that it's super quiet in the cosmos, if you will. It was a good place for it, but there might be more to that. There's a lot of reason. Imagine if they did understand this technology a little bit. Everybody goes, why wouldn't they tell us? Because it's fundamental technology that if you knew how it worked, then you could do what they're doing.
Right.
And so, yeah, you wouldn't, you know, every time we get a new aircraft, a B-2, a SR-71, they don't tell you for as long as they possibly can. Yeah, they're interested in their power. So as far as experiments down there, it's a really small station. In the 70s and 60s, they did build an underground ice station. You know, there's a fantastic video about it. We still go visit it, the scientists do, to just check to make sure the ice is crushing it up. You know, they put a nuclear reactor at the bottom of it to power it. It didn't work out, but they spent a long time building it, and it's underground or under the ice, which is also at the South Pole about 11,000 feet deep, which is pretty darn deep. It's not underground, if you will. It's under ice is what I should be saying.
Miles of ice.
And what's at that bare land underneath? I mean, there's parts of Antarctica that you can walk up in the mountains, the Dead Sea Valleys or Death Valleys up there. You know, that's where they found that dinosaur at. The local professor from Augustana did that, you know, years ago.
Really?
So there was life down there. Clearly, that was a piece of land where there was life. And there's not a whole lot of barren land where you can look for it. But you, meaning if you're a government-sponsored scientist, can go look for it.
Right.
You can't just go down there and show up and say, hey, I'm here.
Family vacations, the Griswolds.
Looking for the brontosaurus bones.
Right. Fascinating stuff, man. Patrick J, we got to prep for our next show, man. Any more questions for this? We could probably do this for hours.
We need to talk 5G, buddy. We need to talk 5G before we get off. We need to talk about, I've sat there and thought, okay, 5G, microwaves, the aerial spraying, they finally come clean with it. They're spraying aluminum into the atmosphere to reflect the sun's rays, a lot of other crazy stuff to try and cool the earth, which is, anybody who thinks that global warming is a hoax, that at least that it's man-made, man-caused, knows that microwaves and metal objects don't go together. Are they trying to cook us deliberately? What is going on with all of this? What are your thoughts on that?
There's certain countries, if you start looking, that are taking it pretty seriously. Take it seriously. Be a student of your own health, and as far as electromagnetic waves, you wouldn't stand in front of a radar dish and sit there and get blasted by it. You wouldn't stand in front of an X-ray for an extended amount of time. These things have effects in low doses over time. So here's an analogy that maybe you'll appreciate is that, I stand under a fluorescent light, I don't get burned. I go into a tanning booth, fluorescent lights, and yet if that close for a certain intensity, I get cooked. Electromagnetic 5G is that over time, and you're not going to see it to appreciate it. It's not necessarily going to burn a hole on your skin, but what about how it affects your nervous system? What about how it affects your genetics, your DNA? We know that X-rays and all these other waves do it, so why can't the public be informed and have this research before you spit it out in our face and tell us this is what we're using? And they've been doing that for a long time. It's just, here's a technology, it's really cool, look how great it works. Well, how about how it affects me? And the thing is, they're not going to wait 20, 30 years to find out how the research turns out.
Scientists are freaking out right now, right? A lot of scientists have signed a pact. I think it was 137 scientists, really big-name scientists from, I think, 30 different nations who have signed this saying, we have to stop this. This is not the smart, not the right way to go, because it's going to at very least, they said, double cancer.
Yeah.
In mankind.
And of course, they're not going to know that until later on.
Is enough to say we got to put the kibosh on this. Look, I'm okay with this thing downloading slower, if that's the cost. You know what I mean? So at some
you don't
point,
want to download an HD movie in 3 seconds, Pat? Come on,
it's worth it. That's what we're talking. Is people just, I want fast internet, and I don't care if I have lymphoma.
Yeah, it's almost kind of
freaking me out.
Yeah, that is weird. And I think people are going to be willing to make that trade-off, which is scary because you're not going to see it. It's going to be that boiling frog type thing. And secondarily to, the health effects, going back to kind of what you're talking about, this kind of geo energy grid, this natural energy grid that we have, the chakras and meridians, et cetera, the energy, how is this false grid going to affect that? You know what I mean? Yeah,
we got to respect our consumption of electricity and how it affects the earth. And ourselves as a biology of the earth is that, I don't know if that's really what you're getting at there, but we're using a lot of electricity in a lot of different ways. We're throwing waves out. You can't go anywhere in the United States without a tower being next to you, blasting waves in and out of it all the time. We're soaked up in it. And then we're talking about how our dreams can access a possible supernatural state. Well, how do you think that affects those things?
Exactly.
Our thoughts are electromagnetic in a low wave form, a very low wave form that's well studied. So we don't necessarily want interference patterns. Interference patterns is how we get holograms and things like that. There's fundamentals here that these scientists, they know what they're talking about. Give them a little bit of respect, even if I'm a little smart with them at times, is that they deserve it. And so if they're telling you, hey, there might be something bad for it, do your own research, but don't blow it off as a conspiracy,
Yeah.
And before we go, you've got some reading material there that maybe you can suggest for our listeners. Yeah. If you'd like to throw some of that out.
I'll try real quick. Is that, that famous photo of Tesla sitting there underneath the lightning bolt and thousands of volts. He was reading Roger Boscovich. This will put you to sleep if you need some
Boscovich, another Croatian.
That's right. Yeah. There's smart guys over there. If you want the authority on some longitudinal waves and what he was working with, Konstantin Mayal. Listener beware, he's Russian. I had to buy his book from Russia.
Colluding.
Victor Schauberger got taken prisoner by the famous Adolf Hitler to work on UFOs, but really he was interested in free energy and water, and his writings
Is that the bell right there?
Not specifically the bell, but pretty close. And he specifically will tell you his story, in these books. And my favorite is, J.J. Thomson is kind of the father of electricity.
Dynamite. Oh, different J.J. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Different J.J.
No modern names. And then John Keeley was an early 1900s guy that was trying to compete with Tesla. He's really been lambasted, but
the Snell manuscript.
The Snell manuscript is one piece of writing that, I don't care if you believe it came from him or if you think whatever you think of him, read his stuff and then tell me, argue it. He's thinking like Tesla was thinking. He just used a different language that we've tossed out.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah.
This has been.
We really dumbed our show down this time. Who is this idiot? Right? Pulled up in a short bus, and I was wondering, who is this guy?
Justin did us a solid on this.
Dude,
one.
Justin, thank you so much.
I think Joe is going to be a reoccurring guest.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think there's a lot of subjects.
Specifics
for sure. We never got into the Sumerian kings list and some of how these guys' reigns are like 20, 30, 40,000 years. We got to talk about that a little bit more on the ancient tech. But you have any social networking, anything you can shout out, you could track down and pick your brain a little bit?
Nope. I just read books and talk to you guys when invited. And sorry, man, you got to talk the talk and walk the walk. So I'm not on social media.
Right.
I don't get everything I talk about from the internet.
He used the R and the B word. The B word. What books in the R word?
You didn't play
read.
video games as a kid, did you?
I did.
I was just saying, no way he wasn't a gamer, dude, for sure.
But I read, Richard Feynman on my free time when Mom told me to get out of the house.
There you go.
All right.
Joe Tabor, ladies and gentlemen, champ, it's been a pleasure.
Beautiful.
As always, ladies and gentlemen, peace and so much love. Stay tuned. There will always be more.